This is Salam Fayyad. He was one of my first two PhD students a long time ago at the University of Texas at Austin. This event is going to be sort of unusual. Originally, I had invited Salam to give a lecture, but he said he preferred an exchange. So this is going to be an exchange between the two of us. But also, I would like to introduce him. However, this presents somewhat of a problem. I cannot think of words adequate to introduce Salam Fayyad. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to show you some slides. And I'm not going to say a word during these slides. I would like you just to read these slides, because I'm going to say nothing about them. They speak more loudly than anything I can say.
Can I see them?
want to explain how we're going to go about this. As some of you might know, a number of years ago, I previously tried to bring Salam Fayyad here for an exchange with somebody else. At that time, Salam was the Minister of Finance of the Palestinian Authority. I invited him, and I invited Akiva Offenbacher, who was a high-ranking official of the Bank of Israel. This sounded like an interesting match because they both had relevant expertise, but also they had similar intellectual origins. Both of them in their dissertations did research on the same topic. So it looked like an interesting idea. And originally they had agreed. But then, unfortunately, Akiva was called up by the reserves and sent to active duty in the Golan Heights. And that was the end of that arrangement. So what was distinctive about that is both of them had very relevant expertise about the Middle East and the economies in the Middle East. This is going to be somewhat different. This is an exchange between someone who has an enormous amount of expertise and someone who has no expertise at all, namely me. My research has nothing whatsoever to do with the Middle East. So what am I going to do? Why am I going to do this? Because I'm not Akiva Offenbacher. While I don't have any relevant expertise, I've got a whole lot of rumors. The reason is, as Salam's professor, as he became increasingly famous, media people would call me on the phone or send me email. So I was in touch with many people who were interested in what Salam was doing for years. And I heard a lot of rumors, but much of this was verbal. And rumors, they can be distorted, they can be wrong. So I collected together a lot of rumors. Also, for example, sometimes they would contact me and ask me to put them in touch with Salam Fayyad when he was in Ramallah. Well, that was quite difficult to do. So what I would do is I would put them in touch either with Iman Fayyad, his daughter, who was a student at MIT, or Khaled Fayyad, who was a student at the University of Texas at the time, and they could help putting them in touch with Salam Fayyad. So in some sense, I was kind of an intermediary between the media and Salam Fayyad for quite a while. But again, what I have is hearsay and rumors. And I'm sure some of them are distorted and some of them are probably false. In fact, I was just looking at his Wikipedia entry and I saw something there which is in fact totally false. It said that he had worked for the World Bank for many years. He never worked for the World Bank. That was not even true.
Fake news.
Fake news. So what I did is I put together all of these rumors and things. There were about 55 of them. Well, that's too many. I can't ask him one after the other about 55. So I've clustered them together into groups. There's about 10, 12 groups. And I'm going to go through one group at a time. And after each group, I will ask Salam to explain whether it's true, whether it's false, and would he like to add something to it. And again, I'm quite confident some of this isn't quite true. The first group is about his life prior to receiving his PhD from the University of Texas at Austin. Salam was born in a small village near Tulkarm on the West Bank. He moved to Jordan with his family after the Six-Day War in 1967 when he was 15 years old. I'm sure that was a very frightening experience. In that area, they were right in the middle of the war. They moved to Jordan. When he became a college student, he enrolled at the American University in Beirut, Lebanon, as a student of chemistry. And he got a Bachelor of Science degree from American University. Again, might sometimes have been a bit scary because there was a civil war in Lebanon. And I heard that during some of the time that he was there were actually bullets that hit the dormitory. He's had quite an unusual life. After he got his bachelor's degree, a Bachelor of Science again in chemistry, he decided to move to Austin, Texas. This is a complicated story he explained to me at lunch. I don't want to go into the details of it. But something sort of odd happened when he moved to Austin. He had a job in Austin, and he was taking night courses at St. Edward's University, which is a Jesuit-run liberal arts college, where he got his MBA degree. At the time, he wanted to enter the PhD program at the University of Texas at Austin. I hadn't arrived yet. I was still at the Federal Reserve Board in Washington. After I came to the University of Texas at Austin, when Salam did arrive, I started asking around among committee people about what happened. Why was he at St. Edward's University? What was the reason for the delay? Why wasn't he at University of Texas at Austin right away? He was a terrific PhD student. And I wasn't very familiar with academic committees and things at the time. I was hired from the Federal Reserve Board staff directly into a full professorship at the University of Texas. So I've never been an assistant or associate professor, so I was new to the whole thing. But I did ask around. I talked to a professor by the name of Wendell Gordon. Wendell Gordon was unusual. There was a tradition at the University of Texas at Austin that was unique. There was a tradition of institutionalists, but a particular kind of institutionalists that were followers of a person by the name of Clarence Ayres. Clarence Ayres was a philosopher. He had no education in economics at all. He was strictly a philosopher. But he was, at one time, on the faculty of the economics department. And he had a following of some economists who agreed with him. He was extremely hostile to mathematics and to mainstream economics. He was extraordinarily hostile to mainstream economics. And his followers were there. They were all about trying to attack the profession. Wendell Gordon was basically the last of them. What I was told is that when Clarence Ayres was on his deathbed, he turned to Wendell Gordon and said, "You are to carry on the tradition." What I was told is when Salam applied for admission to the PhD program, Wendell Gordon was on the committee for admitting PhD students. And he looked at his application and said, well, he doesn't have a Bachelor of Arts, he has a Bachelor of Science. I don't like science. He studied chemistry and mathematics. I don't like that. Basically, he was afraid of Salam Fayyad. So he tried to prevent Salam from entering the PhD program. Eventually, Salam did extremely well in his studies elsewhere, really proved himself, and then Wendell Gordon couldn't block Salam Fayyad anymore. The rest of the committee said, you can't prevent this guy from coming here, he's really good. So then he became a PhD student, which is when I personally met him. He was very unusual in many ways. One way was the attitude of the other PhD students. They greatly admired him and went to him for advice and assistance in all sorts of ways. Since then, I've never heard this before from PhD students, that they specifically looked up to one PhD student, but they really admired him. His dissertation, which I actually brought with me in case anybody wants to see it, last year, 32 years later, after his PhD, which was in 1986, a former vice president of the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank, Dick Anderson, found it, decided he really needed it in his research, and has put it online for everybody to see. So 32 years after his PhD, now more and more people are using it. That's the end of this group of comments. So I want to ask Salam now, what did I get wrong?
You can do no wrong. You cannot go wrong. Let me first thank you very much. I was, before I really get to respond to the question and comment on the various components of the rumors, as you call them, I always wondered about how I'd feel sharing stage with my mentor of 3 decades ago or more. And I honestly was thinking about this not long ago when Neil Gorsuch was named to the Supreme Court. I read his background. I didn't know who he was or anything like that. So I read who he was, and I found out that he had clerked, as some of you probably know, for Judge Anthony Kennedy 30 years ago. And I thought to myself, wow, if confirmed, he will actually join the bench and he'll be seated alongside his mentor of 30 years ago. I thought of you at the time. That was long before you invited me to come here. And I speculated as to how he felt on his first day on the bench, sitting alongside his one-time mentor, having clerked for him a long period of time. And I thought to myself, he probably would be totally overwhelmed. I was not wrong, I felt it right now. I allowed myself to speculate as to how Judge Anthony Kennedy had felt that moment. Probably he was proud, but maybe there's something there. I don't know for sure, I haven't read anything. He probably looked at Neil and thought to himself, he didn't really get to be the kind of judge I thought. Maybe I should have done a better job mentoring him. I would not at all feel bad if you feel that way. With me having taken the career path I have taken, away from research, the rigors of the profession and all, into the realm of policy and policy making, becoming, as some are often called, a policy wonk, if you will, but all by accident, essentially, by happenstance. So thank you very much for the opportunity. It's really a great honor to have the opportunity to be sitting alongside you. 30 years later, plus a few years, similar to the experience that I have just narrated to you, an immense privilege. And my association with you, and this is truly the way I felt, had a lot to do. It was consistent with my own aspirations, essentially wanting to do the best I could while I was a graduate student. But my experience with you helped me tremendously throughout, and I thought of you many years later along the ways, total dedication to what one was doing. And if there's something that I really had accompanied me throughout my life journey, it was that. I didn't really think much about what I was going to be doing next. I found myself doing things I never thought I would be doing. But I always really tried to do the best I could. I took them very seriously. And wherever life took me, I sort of really went. Ended up doing things I never thought I would end up doing. So forgive me if any of that turned out to be a disappointment, but such is life, as they say. On the long list of issues that came up in the first slide in terms of background and all. Yeah, that's what Wikipedia says about me. And by the way, if you really don't like something that's said about you in Wikipedia and you try to fix it, good luck. I mean, you fix it, but then it really gets unfixed. You fix it, gets unfixed. World Bank is something like this. I never really worked in the World Bank, but because the World Bank and the IMF are confused in the minds of many. So if you are with the IMF, you are with the World Bank. Somebody said I was World Bank. The internet was kind of really beginning to be something, and once the internet says you're something forever. Doesn't really matter what you say. Anyway, but that's an example. Another is because my family comes from this little village called Deir Losun, which is about 7 kilometers north of a city that's not that big, anyway, that large. It's called Tulkarm. In my Wikipedia page, it says I was born in Deir Losun. I never was born in Deir Losun, actually. So that the opening sentence qualifies for a rumor in any way. I was born in Nablus, West Bank city. Lived in Tulkarm, which is about 7 kilometers to the south of this little village. That's where my family originally came from. And the only reason, some people say I'm from Nablus too, but I was just born there. And the only reason that happened is because they had the hospital there back in 1952. And Tulkarm, my hometown, didn't. So that's in terms of background. Now, moving forward, I think it's fairly accurate. I mean, there's set of rumors. I mean, I think I can vouch to most of what was said there, except perhaps a little bit of qualification about leaving after the 6-7 war. It was not really immediately after. It was in 1968. The 6-7 war was in 6-7 in June. 68, we moved to Jordan for the simple reason that prior to the war, my father, late father now, God bless his soul, who was a civil servant at the time for the Jordanian government, he was director of the Department of Agriculture, had been named to go to Abu Dhabi then, it was not the United Arab Emirates, to set up a Department of Agriculture for them, to assist them with that, designated to do it by the government of Jordan at the time. Then the war happened, and then he didn't end up going. Then after the dust settled down on the war and all, the Jordanian government started to really send for him messages here and there, you gotta go. And, we were still pretty young, and my father found it difficult at the time to kind of leave us back and move. So he moved us to Jordan at the time, back in 68. And the rest is accurate. I did my high school in 1 year of high school in a town in Jordan called Irbid, the last 2 in Amman, then moved to the American University of Beirut, and the rest is pretty much really what you said it was for graduate school and experience in getting to Texas and all institutional economics. One thing I should say about Professor Wendell Gordon, I don't know how he really felt over the years, because I took some of his classes and I had a very cordial and warm relationship with him over the years, and we pretty much started to have sometimes kind of lunch on a routine basis at the cafeteria. He was an interesting man in his ways, and I remember I felt so comfortable around him at some point to say, come on now, I mean, is it really not time to change? I mean, the world is moving on. I mean, you're not really going, this is great school, but you're not going to really go too far, continue to, make the case for institutional economics. I took it, it's great, fine, but you're not going to really advance if that's all you do. So you need to open it up and begin to bring in faculty members. And he looked at me and he said, now listen, I mean, I thought I could really have that conversation with him. He said, listen, if you want to do math, go to A&M. So it's funny. I mean, that's something about Texas, by the way. State I have deep affinity for, by the way, since my school days in Texas. It's the whole world is Texas. So if you're not at UT Austin, I mean, the extent of where you could go if you had a plantation, A&M, but nothing else. There are no other schools anywhere in the world.
Oh, thank you. The next block of rumors deals with the time up until he moved to East Jerusalem for the International Monetary Fund. His first job after he got his PhD from the University of Texas at Austin was at the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank, where he did very well, was very highly regarded. In fact, two of the vice presidents he knew, Mike Belanger and Dick Anderson, have asked me to express their deep respect for him, so I'm doing that right now. But after a while, he had to move to Jordan for a position at Yarmouk University. And I have a rumor about this, and this rumor might not be true, but I will tell you the rumor. While Salam was a PhD student, he was receiving some financial support from that university. And as a result, he was basically obligated to go back there to teach, which he did. But he didn't stay there very long. I think it might have been only 2 or 3 years. And then he moved back to the United States. Now, this was sort of a problem because of this contract he had with the university. So the question is, why did he come back? The rumor I heard is quite ugly, and I don't know if this is true. But what I was told is while he was there, in one of the other classrooms, 2 or 3 of the students, while sitting in class, were shot dead. And he decided he didn't want to stay there. So he came back to the United States. I think he probably had to pay to the university some funds for basically breaking the contract. Whether that actually happened at the university or not, I don't know, but that is what I heard. When he came back, he ended up at the International Monetary Fund. Contrary to what the Wikipedia said, he was at the World Bank from 1987 to 1995, and then the International Monetary Fund from 1995 to 2001. He was at the International Monetary Fund all that time. I did know some economists at the International Monetary Fund, and I would talk to them sometimes about Salam. And they would tend to talk about him with a kind of envy in their voice. Apparently, he had risen to a very, very high position at the International Monetary Fund. One person even told me it was as high as you could rise without being a political appointee. So he was way up at the International Monetary Fund. I heard all kinds of envious I even heard that he had a house on the Potomac. I don't know about this stuff. But anyway, at this point, I'd like to ask him now, are these rumors true?
Well, the easiest to really comment on is the last one. I wish. No such thing, yeah, definitely. Generally, this is the first time I am in a setting where things are narrated this way in terms of them happening. I'm used to hearing things about me that are not right or not exactly right, or etc. Generally, things happen, but not quite in the way they are reported on, or in the way the rumors are about them. A good example of this relates to my early days teaching at Yarmouk University, and Professor Burnett is completely right. My education in the United States at the University of Texas at Austin was financed by Yarmouk University, and it was their way of building up their own faculty to send people abroad to get education, go back to teach. Now, of course, when I did this, I didn't think I was really going to have the blessing of doing research, being an apprentice in Bill Burnett's shop, to do something that would end up being of value to something like the Federal Reserve System, Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, for example, or something like that. I didn't know any of this, and I did it anyway. And so I was approached toward the end of my stay in Texas for an interview for the Fed, and I told them I couldn't take a job at the time because of my contractual obligation. They invited me anyway, and they ended up kind of compromising, offering a compromise, something which was they said, okay, you go back, teach there, and come during the summer as a visiting scholar. By that point, I had taught a whole semester, which was spring of '86, I recall. And that was really actually the length of my association. So there's slight correction on the number of years I spent at university. It was really merely just one semester, spring of 1986. In any event, so I go back there and I started teaching. It's not really the case that they were really short on faculty or anything like that. They had a lot of people and classes were small and all. And I was offered this great opportunity to really continue to do research on something very important that I started doing when I was a PhD student, and I thought it would be a really great opportunity, too great to miss. And so I had a discussion with the administration of the university there, asking permission to go leave without pay for a little while, thinking that that was, of course, good for me, but potentially advantageous to the university. Nobody had heard of Yarmouk University at the time, maybe not many have since, anyway. And, you know, the association is something as reputable, by the way, a word that Bill is, I mean, I remember him using a lot. So research is either reputable or he wouldn't say anything. A school is either reputable, he wouldn't say anything else. So the word is either reputable or otherwise, but the otherwise is never really explained. Anyway, so I thought there was a win-win situation there, but they wouldn't accept. So yes, I ended up actually buying my way out of that contract, and I did pay the full amount that they really actually had asked me to pay. There are many little stories, some of them personal, associated with that, including my father's own role in having, you know, after I moved to the IMF, in having decided that you know, if I had paid the full amount like in one go, it was going to be much better, more economical for me. He decided to become an economist, and that was a catastrophic decision that he made, making it extremely difficult for me to manage in my early married life, to be honest with you. But anyway, long stories here and there, all of this happened. About the incident of violence, and you reminded me now. So again, it's an example of, there's some truth to this. There was upheaval at the university during that period of time, and there was loss of life, not quite in my classroom or anything like that, but there was a lot of vandalism and all, calls for strike and things like this. And I remember I had very good rapport with my own students, and they wanted to disrupt exams and all. They kind of took this decision to disrupt final exams and things like this. And I remember kind of quite a scene. It's like a mob scene, essentially, people walking in and wanting to disrupt the exam. And I remember kind of holding onto the paper, said, over my dead body, you're not going to take anything of this. And they just left me alone. I actually left the university because it was, I thought, the right thing for me to do more than anything else. That was my motivation. I thought it was a good career to pursue in research and all, although I did not end up doing it too long at the Federal Reserve Bank St. Louis. As I was getting married, long story, I thought life was going to be a lot easier for my wife, new wife at the time, just newlywed, Washington, D.C., more cosmopolitan, International Monetary Fund, international, as opposed to not finding a whole lot to do early on. And that explains why I moved to the IMF, and that was fundamental shift in careers, because that moved me away completely from the realm of the alphas and betas and gammas, and the muse of the world to policy. And since then, I stayed doing that for the rest of my life, except for the past couple of years I've been teaching. But before that, it was really all about policy.
Thank you. The next group of rumors are about the time he spent until he retired from the International Monetary Fund. He moved to the West Bank as the IMF liaison to the Palestinian Authority. He was living in East Jerusalem. He traveled widely throughout the Palestinian territories, working for the IMF in that role, which was difficult. He would travel to Gaza, West Bank. He would travel throughout these territories. This was not easy to do in just an ordinary car. He was not using any kind of special facility to protect himself. This is when he started to become really famous. Many media people wanted to talk with him and wanted to know what was going on. And I started getting calls and people wanting to talk to me about Salam Fayyad. What I was hearing is that the reporters who would talk with him had the impression that he was a visionary with a unique insight about Palestine, and they wanted to talk with him more than with anybody else. One journalist who I called, was saying great praise about Salam, but complaining about riding in Salam's car because Salam was chain-smoking cigarettes. I was happy to learn that he recently stopped doing that.
Like yesterday.
Yesterday, I don't know. Then on July 13th, 2001, the New York Times quoted Stanley Fischer. Every economist knows who Stanley Fischer is. He was high up at the International Monetary Fund. This is what Stanley Fischer said to the New York Times about Salam Fayyad. He is telling everyone the truth as he sees it, and he has been extraordinarily effective. As you probably know, Stanley Fischer subsequently became the governor of the Bank of Israel. Eventually, Salam Fayyad retired from the International Monetary Fund, and he went to work as the regional manager and director of the Arab Bank in Palestine. And when I heard this sort of clicked in my mind. I remember when I would talk to him as a student about his possible ambitions, he sometimes would say, well, maybe I would like to be a banker in Amman, Jordan. Well, he wasn't in Amman, Jordan, but he was at the Arab Bank in Palestine in a high position, and I figured, well, this sounds like something he really wanted to do. I'd like to ask now.
First, Stanley Fischer, I would not let that moment pass without really saying a word or two about long association with him, which I deeply cherish. This is another person who had a great deal of influence in my life and career trajectory and how I handled things and all. Great professional, of course, economist for the ages, there's no question, everybody knows that. Deeply interested in getting things done right in that part of the world. And because of that, that really created a special relationship between him and me that defied the rules of the bureaucracy. The IMF is a very, very highly structured institution. I mean, highly disciplined. You don't talk to anyone about business who is not your immediate boss. But at the time, I was separated from Stanley Fischer by multi-layers of grades, but that sort of really disappeared, particularly when I was posted to the Palestinian Authority. Was in direct contact with me on issues and was extremely supportive throughout and became close friends and family friends subsequently and all. There's definitely a lot in there. In fact, I did join the Arab Bank when I did, because there comes a time in your life as an envoy, which essentially is what a resident representative is. I mean, you can think of him or her as ambassador. Ambassadors have fixed terms. You can't really stay forever. You need to go back to headquarters. And before anything else, I'm Palestinian. And even before I was posted as an IMF rep, around the time Oslo happened, the Oslo Accords were agreed, and I started to really feel completely unnatural about being a staff member of the IMF, living in Reston, reading the Sunday edition of Washington Post real estate section and all of that sort of stuff. I really started to develop this sense of wanting to leave. There's something not right about this. And I actually started, looking into it. It would have been crazy. Our children at the time were very young. We had mortgage and stuff, and they're just not, you just can't leave. And I was thinking about it. Around the same time, the IMF really decided to have an office there, and I was selected to be the guy to go. So at some level, that ended up doing two things for me: keeping me with the IMF, no disruption whatsoever in my own personal life, but at the same time being stationed back home. A very important period of my life, not part of the rumor, so I'll skip it, but was really an interesting period during that time. Then when the time came for me to come back to headquarters, I was not going back. And so I chose to kind of leave the IMF to stay back home, and that's how I ended up actually doing the Arab Bank job. I was offered to do it. Around the same time, I was thinking of leaving because I was not really going back with all that was happening in my own country. It wasn't a country then, still is not a country today. That's another conversation. But I felt not right about it, and so that's why I left the IMF and worked as a manager of the Arab Bank only for a few months before I joined the Palestinian Authority. I was asked to join as finance minister there. And it was an interesting short period of time. It was at the height of the second intifada, with all kinds of violence and all. And the Arab Bank by far was the largest, and still is, bank with all of its operations in the West Bank and Gaza. And I think it definitely took a non-banker to do the banking at the time for the bank to function. I mean, I had no clue, to be honest with you. I did all kinds of things which, had I known anything about banking, I definitely would not have done. It's not really operational. It's not credit risk that I'm talking to you about. That's something that you, even if you really have not done banking before, you can have a sense for. It's the operational risk that I had no sense for whatsoever, like with all the violence, shutdowns, curfews, and all of that sort of thing. The bank was supposed to really remain open. Cash had to really be moved from one bank to another, one branch to another. All kinds of, let me put it this way, unorthodox way to move cash from one place to another. There's just no way a banker would do that kind of thing. I did it for 4 months. It was interesting while it lasted. Didn't last too long, though. I wasn't fired, though, for doing those things.
Thank you. The other group of rumors is about Salam's appointment to be Minister of Finance of the Palestinian Authority. He was appointed by Yasser Arafat, who directly asked him to be Minister of Finance. I've heard two conflicting rumors about why Arafat did that. One of them has a nice tone to it, the other one not so nice. I'm not sure which of the rumors is correct. One of the rumors is that the Palestinian Authority was beginning to have difficulty receiving aid from the United States and Europe because it was becoming believed that the Palestinian Authority was corrupt, and the donations going to the Palestinian Authority were not necessarily going to the people. Arafat knew Salam Fayyad was a person of very high integrity and experience, so he went to Salam and offered him the position to help the Palestinian Authority be able to bring in funds from the West. That is the positive story about Arafat's motives. The other story I heard was that there were big demonstrations against Palestinian Authority corruption, and Arafat was basically forced to bring someone in from outside, whether he wanted to or not. He had no choice because of demonstrations. So I don't know which of those two explanations is correct for Arafat's motives, but it was definitely Arafat who did invite Salam, and Salam agreed. Now, when he accepted that position, I read about it, and I was kind of surprised because, as I mentioned, I thought he was probably very happy working in banking. That was something he had told me was his ambition. So I emailed him, and I asked him, is this really true? Are you really going to move to Ramallah to be the Minister of Finance of the Palestinian Authority? Well, in preparation for this event, I went through my email to find Salam's reply, and I will read to you exactly what his reply was that he sent to me. This was Salam's reply.
WikiLeaks.
He said, this was in 2002, what you hear is true, and this, well, may be my last day as a banker. We will see what the future brings. But the present is undoubtedly horrible, and we need to do something dramatic and dramatically good to get out of the vicious cycle we are in. That's exactly what he wrote to me. I would now like to ask Salam, especially about the Arafat rumor. Why did he really do that?
That email was not WikiLeaks. I mean, actually, sounded like something I would have said. Still true today, by the way, sadly, in many ways. You know, actually, the two lines that you identified as rumors in that block are not unrelated. In fact, this gives me an opportunity to correct the record on this, because my joining the Palestinian Authority in the summer of 2002 is typically associated with their having developed international pressures on the Palestinian Authority at the height of the Second Intifada, violence and all. International pressure developing, and so as a way of responding to that, to really bring in some new faces, this new face essentially was an outsider, you know, but that's the dominant narrative. Less understood was the extent to which the demands for reform to the ways in which the Palestinian Authority was doing things were emanating from inside the country, by the legislature, for example, the media, civil society. People were not happy about the way, you know, things were done. Early on, the PA sort of was getting a pass under the rubric that was new, just got started. We have a long way to go. We need to fix things. The tradition. What comes with it, the fact that we are preoccupied with an occupation situation that we need to end. But that, you know, with the passage of time, ceased to be adequately convincing to people. And what is significant about the second of the two rumors that you mentioned is that really it brings that into sharper focus than you would find typically written about summarily. Like if somebody were to write a story about me today, it's typically the internationally backed, US backed, this backed, but never, rarely, described as somebody who really came also against the backdrop of domestic national discontent with the way in which business was done, particularly in financial management. So yeah, there was truth to this, and the finances in terms of structures, institutions, needed a lot of fixing in terms of work processes, policies, budgeting, and what have you. And I thought of myself as someone who was a professional, who was asked to do something that was difficult at the time. It was a huge challenge. Of course, technically not easy, but politically very difficult. The context in which you are operating and the mindset, preoccupation with all of these other issues. That's a lot can be said about that period. It really went through my head at the time, the complexity of it. But largely correct. And I was very fortunate, as a matter of fact, that things started to really get better quickly in the way we chose to kind of intervene, where to begin, what to do, and what not. We started to get some traction fairly quickly. And I would like, if I may, to take this opportunity to really actually correct the record on something once and for all. Because to this day, financial mismanagement and doing things the wrong way and all are associated with the mention of our late leader, Salam Fayyad, to this day even, okay? What I can tell you is that despite all of what was said about the relationship, and that a lot of it was really exaggeration and wrong and all. I mean, I did have a very good working relationship with Obama. I mean, I can tell you that. He would have told you that he's no longer with us. And people who are close knew that. Changing status quo was something that was extremely difficult. I mean, he's been doing this and been managing it this way for a long period of time. So it was not an easy, but he knew that I really meant to do the right thing. And I was about wanting to do the right thing. I had a lot of empathy. And he saw it, but I also was determined to really get it right. And what I really can do to actually get the record straight on this is most of the most fundamental elements of a well-functioning public finance system were put firmly in place while he was still alive. He was still president. And I say this for the record. And I say it because stuff is written about him, doing this and rejecting that and whatnot. I'm not really saying that this was easy. But most of everything that was necessary to get us a well-functioning public finance system, most basic elements, budgeting, treasury operations, revenue administration, putting budget on the internet, transparency, and all of that. Most of those basic elements were in place. Financial operations, commercial operations, Palestinian Authority. A lot of non-transparency. I mean, a lot of complaining about why the authority was in business of making money, monopolizing this, that, and the other thing. All of those issues were fixed and done while he was still president, to be honest with you. I mean, for the record, this happened. So yeah, there is something to this, but I'm glad that actually in what you brought up an issue related to mismanagement having been a matter of domestic discontent as well as international commentary and interest.
Thank you. The next group of hearsay rumors relate to a term called Fayyadism, which has become very well known. I want to tell you about this. Salam acquired an exceptional reputation for honesty and integrity. He did not join Fatah. One of my friends is a Palestinian who told me that Fatah is considered to be the Palestinian elite. Salam would not join Fatah. He, of course, did not join Hamas. Those were the two primary political parties. Instead, he created his own entirely independent party called the Third Way. Another well-known person, Hanan Ashwari, was part of that party. To this day, he has never affiliated with Fatah or Hamas, which was quite unusual, but he wanted to be completely independent. And he was greatly respected for that and trusted. One story I heard was that the first time that he was in George W. Bush's office, the Oval Office, Bush greeted him with the hook and horn symbol for the University of Texas, and they talked about football, so they became good friends. I read that he was at one time invited to the home of an Israeli prime minister. I don't recall which prime minister it was. But then of particular significance, there was an article in the New York Times by a very well-known commentator by the name of Tom Friedman. And his article had a big impact. Basically, what he said about Salam Fayyad was what he was trying to do by building the economy of the Palestinian territories was to turn it into a de facto country. Friedman called that Fayyadism. That was the point of view. One of the sentences in Friedman's article in the New York Times was, "The most exciting new idea in Arab governance ever." I'd like to ask Salam what he'd like to say about that.
There was a lot in this, actually. Before we get to the letter commentary, particularly related to Thomas Friedman, what he said about what we're doing at the time, I remember that first conversation. I had many conversations with Tom Friedman over the years, including in settings like this, by the way, but this was in my office early on. And it's one of those interesting things. I mean, somebody all of a sudden coins a phrase that's attached to your own name, and you are at last trying to define what it really means, you yourself, as a matter of fact, and the way that it became understood as something related to the way in which Tom himself articulated. We were having this conversation, I remember, because it really became a big thing. For skeptics and critics, it was kind of fodder for even more skepticism, more cynicism, obviously. But this comes with the territory. And what I remember, from that conversation, I was telling him two things. One is that legitimacy in government is important. If you are in government, you really need to feel sense of legitimacy. Throughout my tenure as Prime Minister, unfortunately, I was not as Finance Minister. As Finance Minister, we had a functioning or a functional legislature, let's put it this way. In the period, the 6-year period term that I said as Prime Minister, there was no legislature. It was, but it was not convening. It was not functional. It was not a functioning legislature. So I was deprived of what I really would have, at all times, what I felt was extremely important, a part of what you do as part of the executive branch, to go and open yourself up to accountability and all of that. I felt what I was doing was important throughout. Early on, as soon as I joined the PA, everything was important. Everything was becoming tradition. Early on in my career as Finance Minister, kind of really high point was, I remember when I walked in with my first draft budget to the legislature and gave a budget speech and inspired parliamentarians, and it's a big thing. But I was telling Tom was, elections are important. We need to have elections. We need to really somehow find a way to get the legislature to work, because I just don't feel, right about this in many ways. But what is really more important than the legitimacy you get by opening yourself up to formal accountability, which is essential, is something that really comes from within, essentially. Knowing that you're doing the best you could at all times. I mean, that's really absolutely essential. Relative to well-defined objective. And I added, you need the concept to govern. You need the concept to govern. You need the concept to run anything. And this is about building, this is about freedom for Palestinian people. It's about something that all Palestinians say they agree on, a state. If it is that, then it's up to us to really actually build it. Project its reality on the ground. And yes, legitimacy, to me, is legitimacy that's derived from accomplishment relative to a well-stated, well-defined objective. So that really is what went into this conversation, essentially. Going out and really acting on an agenda, or toward the accomplishment of an objective that you really set out, something that's logical, it makes sense, you can really take it to people, you can explain it, and they can measure the degree to which you're successful or otherwise by the extent to which you're making progress toward that end, and at all times, understand that you derive legitimacy from achievement. I mean, that's very important, relative to an objective that you think everybody works on. That if there is a philosophy or worldview, it's that. It became called Fayyadism, and it refers to all of those things, approach to government, and all of that sort of thing, fine, but it really essentially conditioned the way I did business was in government, in a way that was totally, up until then, unorthodox. For example, going out and to rural areas, meeting people. There was not a political campaign or anything like that. There were no elections or anything like that. But to me, it made perfect sense if you want to do infrastructure work in certain parts of the country that had not seen the hand of government for ages, to really go out and listen to what people think is priority. This is really, it really ended up being more like time hole after time hole after time hole. This is what democracy is like. It's a tradition, it's government processes, it's essential. Now, as to my own political orientation, it's true what you said about me not having been a party member. I did not have party affiliation. When I was a student, young student at the American University of Beirut, it was very lively politically. I mean, campus was extremely lively politically. Everybody was affiliated with somebody, with some party, and Palestinian national movement was very active and was dominant in the scene. For some reason, even when I was kind of that young, when everybody had a party affiliation of sorts, I did not. It had nothing to do with the judgment that I had on anyone. I valued from those early days something that, to me, I did not conceptualize this way, independence. Being a member of a party is important. I mean, I'm not really discouraging anyone from joining parties or anything like that. But being a member of a party comes with things. I mean, it's like any other affiliation. It's part of a social contract. I mean, you really get in, you take things, you have to toe the party line, you have to do things. I valued independence, that's all. It was not a negative comment on those who were there. It just, I was too afraid of straitjacketing myself. I just wanted, I wanted to think freely, to act freely and all. The third way that you mentioned, actually, this is slight correction, it actually was not a party. And if it was party of independence. All it was, actually, was an electoral slate. It did not exist as a party before the elections, and it did not exist as a party after the elections. What happened in the second of the two national elections that we had in Palestine, the authority came up with a system of proportional voting, which required essentially a system like a European-style democracy, for example, where you have party lists that people run on, as opposed to individuals running, as you have here in congressional districts, for example. So that required that we will actually put together a slate of candidates, and we put together this as a slate, and we called it the third way. But it really was not a party, did not really have party structure to it or anything like that. And Hannah and I ended up winning seats in parliament. We were members until it was dissolved recently. It's something that we really need to go back to. We definitely need to renew ourselves in important ways. We need to really go to the people, and we need to really involve them. Sorry. Okay.
I'm going to start putting together groups because we might run out of time. So I'm going to talk mostly now about a television program. On CBS, there is a television program called 60 Minutes. It's a very well-known, highly regarded television program. In 2003, Leslie Stahl had Salam Fayyad on the program for about a half an hour. I watched the program. I was very alarmed. It was rather frightening hearing what was being said. One of the things that was said is that Salam Fayyad was becoming known as the anti-Arafat because he had apparently revealed that Arafat had stolen enormous amounts of money from the Palestinian Authority. That he was apparently worth somewhere between $1 and $3 billion. That he was paying his wife in Paris $100,000 a month. According to this program, Arafat ran a vast patronage system This is the quotation. It said, Fayyad says Arafat pays his security forces alone $20 million a month, all in cash. There was also a statement about his was forced to bring in Salam. I already mentioned that. But what I really want to show you is the most alarming statement, and I have this on a slide. That particular program alarmed me. I was worried about Salam's safety, but I subsequently learned that he was safer than it might have appeared. What he had done in the Palestinian territories had given him an extraordinary amount of support from the Palestinian people. For example, there had been high tolls that truck drivers had to pay. This was a rather corrupt toll. He ended the tolls. There was a corrupt petroleum corporation which he dismantled that decreased fuel costs by 20%. Some people were referring to him as the Palestinian Robin Hood. He was becoming very popular. But perhaps most significantly was what he did regarding the salaries of the Palestinian police. As Minister of Finance, he was appropriating those funds and transferring them to another minister who would pay the police in cash, apparently after skimming out 50% of it himself. So from what I was told, Salam cut that minister out completely and started direct depositing the salaries for the police into their own bank accounts, effectively doubling their salary. What I was told was that after that, when he walked down the street, even in Gaza, the police would salute him. In some ways, he was perhaps safer than Arafat. Now, one other thing that happened that was quite interesting, that I don't recall exactly what the reason was for this, but the Israeli military, for some reason, I think they wanted to arrest Arafat, and they surrounded the headquarters building that he was in. They turned off the water and the heat and the air conditioning. It was in the middle of the summer. It was really miserable in there. He was there almost alone, except for one other minister who stayed there with him. It was Salam Fayyad. Salam.
Well, thank you. I think there is in this an identification of some of the key issues that we really have to address. First, a quick comment on CBS 60 Minutes program. As no doubt, at least some of you are familiar with this program, long running for a long period of time. The stuff that was said, usually they come in with pre-reporting on something, and then they talk to you. So all of that pre-textual material would be kind of narrated. I was not certainly aware of it until then you ask a question. Then when they do the production and all of that, they make it interesting in some ways. I remember, and because the characterizations there, Arafat money and millions and billions and all of that. And this is something that really I had to contend with from day one. Huge media interest, by the way. As soon as I was appointed, everybody wanted to talk to me. Who's this new guy? What is he about? How is he going to really deal with Arafat and the Arafat money and this and the corruption and the security and all of these issues that we were talking about. And I was really, in the way I try to approach this, maybe there's something that I should say, particularly to students. Hopefully, at least some would end up being practitioners of things like you get in a situation like this, particularly if you are an outsider. You go in there and you say, my way or the highway, or you exit, but you will not really have accomplished much. I mean, I think you definitely should really keep it as an option to leave if you do not get things right, or if you see no promise of getting things right. But if you really see some possibility for working in a way that could eventually produce, you need to be patient. This was really about freedom for Palestinian people. It's not worthwhile not coming in and saying my way or the highway. Unless you do this now, you're gone. It was wrong, operationally speaking, from my point of view, to get in there and say, let's look in the mirror. Who did what 10, 15 years ago, and let's really fight corruption, quote unquote, by going after people who really did bad things. Well, good luck with that. I mean, if you really started doing things this way while the leakage was still going on. So I said, no, let's just first plug the holes in this reservoir, and then we'll see what we can do about the rest. And it is that way that really I approach doing all kinds of things, including petroleum you mentioned, including what you mentioned about security, the manner in which they were paid. I need to really comment very quickly on the question of Arafat money. I sort of really alluded to it when I said commercial operations and investment operations of Palestinian Authority. When the PA first came into existence, it tended to get in business activities in the form of monopolies, oil, petroleum products, that is cement, gravel, building material, things like this. And it was doing this most transparently. There were two things that were wrong with it. A, the PA itself should not really be involved in these things. The PA is the government, and government should not really be in business of making money. Government should be in business of collecting taxes to finance expenditures appropriated to serve the people, not to really go and do what the business sector or private sector is supposed to do. Second, they were doing it totally non-transparently, and nobody knew how much money was being made, what was happening to it, and all. So you could get in there and say, unless I really have this tomorrow, I'm not really going to really get into the job. I can assure everybody in this room, here is what happened to the so-called Arafat money. We started wanting to, try to appeal to some principle in management. How are you going to really do this? My proposal was to set up something along the lines of a holding company type structure. We call it Palestine Investment Fund. The proposal was to bring in all of these operations under the umbrella of Palestine Investment Fund and to manage it as a holding company type operation. Yes, owned by the PA for starters, hopefully in the end to liquidate it, privatize it and all. But most importantly, managed transparently. People would know, how much money is being made, what's happening to it, the profits on it should go to Treasury. In other words, the basic fundamental principles of public finance being applied. That thing happened in August of 2008, literally 2 months after I joined the PA, and 1 month before I found myself under siege with President Yasser Arafat in September of that year. He himself and no one else signed a decree to empower me to do this. Yeah, it's really up to you to do with that what you can. So he signed that piece of paper. This I hereby, authorize setting up of this, and basically we wrote the charter. We took it from there, and I wanted, as finance minister, to be chairman of the board, and he's the chairman of the board. We brought in 3 people from private sector, a couple of ministers, myself, and we started a process of accounting, bringing things in, consolidating them, doing valuation. We used PricewaterhouseCoopers for that purpose. People with credibility in order for people to believe that you're doing things right. This is not really an effort to try to hoodwink anyone into believing anything. It took a few months. In February 2003, we got to the point where we had all of those assets, and I had the word of people I was dealing with for it. I was not there to know what the money was. And I asked this question, is this all? And I was assured that it was all. What am I going to do? Because I'm going to really take this volume, it was like a volume, and basically take it to the media and say, this is the so-called Arafat money. And I knew I was going to be asked the question, is this all? And certainly I was. In February 2003, I held a little bit of press conference, and I said we're done with the process of consolidating assets. They are valued, and I remember, at $650 million by the expert community. And I was asked the question, predictably, is this all the money there is? And I said, all I can tell you, the best of my knowledge it is. But since you all are here, and you all represent or come from countries with massive intelligence operations and all, this is an invitation to anyone out there who happens to know otherwise. I'll be the first one. I would like to be the first one to know. That was February 2003. We are today 16 years later exactly, February 2019. Well, today, 1st of March, sorry, we just missed it by the anyway. 16 years later, no one has ever since then come up with anything to contradict that. We took that, we managed it right, and when I left the Ministry of Finance in late 2004, we turned it over as a company with assets of $1.3 billion at the time. Managed completely transparently, with accountability, audited accounts, external auditors, and whatever. This was done. The petroleum, yes, what you really said about this, fantastic example of reform that really meant more money for the government, because it was really very effective in curtailing smuggling, because the price was set way too high, so there was a lot of smuggling. We slashed the price, and smuggling stopped, so government revenues rose. People started relying on the products they're using quality-wise. There was a lot of product adulteration. All of that stuff happened when Abu Ammar was still alive. This actually was accomplished in May in 2003. Paying security services, the problem with it was not really, as mentioned in the rumor, that there was another minister or anything like that. It was that actually the money went to financial administration of security services, and then financial administration of security services dispersed the salaries to individual officers in cash. There was something profoundly wrong with that, and I thought definitely we really need to do this through bank accounts. And what you said, it happened in 2004, and that was done, and you're right. I mean, the guys who liked it the most were the security personnel themselves, not only, I should say, because they started to get more money for what they're paying, but actually because they felt it was done in a dignified way. Nothing can be more humiliating than lining up for your own salary, if it's really a hard-won and hard-earned salary. This wasn't a gift. This is their thing. They understood we're doing this further, I think. That's why they had this really good feeling about it.
Thank you. Because of the time constraint, I'm now going to read through all of my remaining notes. So this is going to be quite a few things all at once before I ask Salam to reply again. What happened was that Arafat died under mysterious circumstances. We'll probably never know what happened because his wife refused an autopsy. There was then an election for a new president. A Hamas member was elected. This was to be the prime minister of the Palestinian Authority. But then there was a violent rebellion by Hamas in Gaza in 2007. And it was quite bad. They killed some Palestinian police. They drove Fatah out of Gaza. Then the president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, fired the Hamas prime minister and appointed Salam. So he was then prime minister. In May of 2009, a Hamas official labeled Fayyad a traitor and promised an earthquake of a response. The Palestinian Authority ruled the West Bank alone, while Gaza separated and was under Hamas rule. Salam was very respected in Europe, Israel, and the United States as prime minister. In addition to making progress towards a country, he had brought security and peace. For example, there was a city called Jenin that had a history of violence. He pacified it. So in order to get the economy to be able to grow in a normal way, he needed law and order. He brought law and order. Now, Mahmoud Abbas eventually wanted to try to bring Gaza back into the Palestinian Authority. The people in Gaza are Palestinians. I understand that at that point, Salam said he would step down if he were asked, because obviously the Hamas people wanted a different prime minister. But he was not asked. So Salam remained prime minister. Then Abbas went to the United Nations, asking for unilateral recognition as a country. This was done over Salam's objections. From what I've heard in a meeting, what he said was this would result in the cutoff of external funds and would cripple the economy that he had worked so hard to build. And to emphasize his point, he slammed his hand down on the table and broke a bone. The consequences were as he predicted. The economy was severely damaged. Salam then stepped down. So he then came back to the United States. When he came back to the United States, I asked him what are his plans now that he's in the United States. At that time, he told me he was planning on working on a charity that would help the poor people of Africa. But after that, I heard something else. Somebody who was at the Princeton Woodrow Wilson School contacted me, sent me an article he had written, seemed quite upset, saying that there was a great injustice, that the United Nations wanted Salam Fayyad to become its representative to Libya as the head of the mission for Libya. This was widely supported within the United Nations. But Nikki Haley opposed it. The American administration opposed it. This person at the Woodrow Wilson School wrote a very long article he wanted me to read, which was extremely favorable about Salam Fayyad, saying he was the perfect person for the position, and asking me, was there anything I could do to help with this? We need to somehow change Nikki Haley's mind. Well, Nikki Haley didn't change her mind. And the reason it was given, well, first of all, it seemed rather odd. He was not going to be representing the United States. He was going to be representing the United Nations. But nevertheless, the United States apparently had veto power over it. And what Nikki Haley said about Salam Fayyad was very, very positive. So it wasn't that somehow he wasn't qualified or wouldn't do a really good job. It was that he's a Palestinian. The reason that the American government didn't want Salam Fayyad to get that job was because he's a Palestinian. The position was that Palestine is not recognized as a government by the United Nations. Therefore, Palestinians should not have United Nations jobs, which seemed like a very petty, sort of racist position. But that's what happened, and Nikki Haley did not back down. Shortly after that, I learned that the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton had instead hired him. Well, to me, that sounds better. He's probably a lot safer there than in Libya. So now Salam Fayyad is now at the Woodrow Wilson School of Princeton teaching there. He also has a position at Brookings. I think it's the best job he ever had myself. But anyway, can you now comment on this?
Oh, yeah. It definitely is fantastic for me to have the opportunity to go back to academia and to teach, particularly from the point of view of someone who had acquired some life experiences to share with public policy students. I did that also at the Kennedy School for much of last year as well, and I found new areas of interest to me related to democratization in the region, on the strength of improving governance in the region. Specific examples, I'm really completely seized with that. this is kind of really my new life intellectually now. Princeton itself is a great place. The university itself, we have people can really testify to that. City is great and all, but I'd be lying to you if I told you I felt natural about being there. I mean, I feel natural only when I'm really back home doing things there. So yeah, it's good, but as soon as I really find something to do back home, I'll go back home, without really thinking much about it. That's my life. That's what I'm really most drawn into. Best job anyone can have, as far as I'm concerned, is to be in a position where they can have an influence for the better, for good of people. No one expressed it better than Condoleezza Rice by her brilliant choice of title for her memoirs, or one of them anyway. Said, no higher honor. There can be no higher honor, to tell the truth. No higher honor than to be in a position to do public service. I mean, I'd just change whatever it is I'm doing in a heartbeat to really do public service. I'm committed to that, given what's riding on it, not only in terms of basic fundamental well-being, but in our case, Palestinians, it's really about freedom as well. It's very important. And it is in that sense that I had this aversion to the internationalization, the United Nations and all. It's not that I think that there's something wrong with us really going to the United Nations or anything like that. I mean, if we Palestinians do not go to the United Nations, where else should we go? There's logic to it. At the same time, the practical person in me, I always measure things in terms of, so what am I expected to get out of this? And to me, success was measured in terms of the extent to which a particular initiative brought us closer to the day when we as Palestinians are able to live as free people with dignity in a country of our own. I did not think that road was going to really bring us closer to the end of occupation. I did not think so. That happened in November of 2012, and here we are in 2019. The reality of Israeli occupation is a lot more deeply entrenched today than it was then. There's a lot of excitement about the recognition that we got internationally and all, but what good did that do in terms of really changing the fundamentals on the ground, in terms of really bringing us again closer to the day when we were able to live as free people with dignity in a country of our own? So yeah, I really felt strongly about that at the time, and I thought that it kind of really changed the narrative in a way that was going to really be harmful, yes, economically, but also injurious to our drive for freedom, because in many ways it complicated things in a big time way, predictably. And I also think it's not really a trivial matter. The well-being of people is not a trivial matter. You just can't, the notion that, would rather go hungry than yield and all. That's a false choice. I mean, if we have to really go hungry rather than yield, if you're absolutely positively have to do something like this, I salute you. But why do you time and again present your people with this choice as if it's genuine, real choice that they have to make? People don't have to go hungry or be free. It's your job to really find a way in which their basic fundamental needs are met while they are sustaining their drive to freedom. And when you can't do that, you failed. So this notion that, well, it doesn't really matter, is alien to me. It matters. I think about the parents who are unable to give a little bit of money to their kids when they go to school. I worry about that. That's part of my job. That's not trivial. I mean, it's important for people all over the world, especially important for Palestinians. For us, most important thing is perseverance, to be able to withstand the adversity of the occupation until we get to freedom. Now, it seems to me doing things in a way that undermines that in any way paying not enough attention to fundamental needs like education and health and all of those things, actually runs counter to an objective which you say is important, which is steadfastness. How are people going to stick around if they do not have schools to send their kids to? Healthcare facilities to use and things like this, investments to find jobs for their kids and all of that. So basic, you cannot separate. So it's in that sense. It's not that I really didn't think it was legitimate. It was just not right policy choice, and I really felt, as you can tell to this day, passionately about it then. And yes, what you described as physically as having happened did happen. There were other things about Gaza and the disunity that took. Yes, indeed, when they had several Fatah and Hamas reconciliation rounds and all, and I made it absolutely clear. I would, and in fact, in one instance, I did submit the government's resignation and said, okay, please, by all means, this is what we need. To this day, I think, as number one step in a meaningful effort to really get us out of the corner we are in, to empower ourselves. Empowerment is to unite the country. That's what's really important, and that requires that all work together. Fatah, Hamas, independence, and everyone, to be honest with you, and to find a good way to manage pluralism, not to kill it. I mean, that's what the art of politics is about. It's not about excluding people you don't like, you disagree with. It's about finding a way to effectively manage pluralism. Pluralism is a good and healthy thing. Your job in government is to work toward having institutions that are capable of managing that effectively. That's what I found is so desperately missing on our side right now, and that, I believe, is what we should preoccupy ourselves with.
Okay, we basically run out of time, but I want to ask Salam just one final question. This is about Camp David in 2000, which is prior to the time that Salam was in Ramallah. At that time, there was a very encouraging negotiation going on with Arafat, Ehud Barak, and Bill Clinton. Much of the world believed there was going to be an agreement, but Arafat walked out. After that, Arafat's popularity and approval within the Palestinian areas actually increased. Palestinians believed that his position was correct. Barak's popularity within Israel decreased. Most Israelis thought he was offering too much. The rumor that went around about what killed the agreement was the right of return. What we were being told was that Arafat was insisting on the right of return for Palestinians to be able to return to Israel proper. That was apparently the thorn. But we've just seen that Salam Fayyad has stated that there doesn't have to be a right of return to Israel. It could be to Palestine. So my question for Salam Fayyad is, if he had been there negotiating for the Palestinians instead of Arafat, would there have been an agreement?
Well, thank you. First of all, to the best of my knowledge, the negotiations broke down on Jerusalem, not on refugees. I wasn't there, and I do not know, actually. There have been many accounts of it. Some people who were close, who wrote books and all, but I believe the consensus is the negotiations broke down over Jerusalem. And the insistence on the part of Israel to not let go of important parts of Jerusalem, namely East Jerusalem, and to basically accept Palestinian sovereignty over Jerusalem. And I think, to be honest with you, fundamentally, if we're really talking about two-state solution, just so let me be absolutely clear, one of these two states has been around for 7 decades now. That's Israel. So if we're still talking about two-state solution, we're talking about the emergence of that other state that make two-state solution happen. That other state is State of Palestine. And the understanding was that it was going to emerge on the territory occupied by Israel in 1967. That happens to include East Jerusalem. So the principle here, there's no question. Negotiations should not really be about principles. And I'll talk about right of return in a little bit. This is important to clarify. Negotiations should not be about principles. principles or narratives. I mean, the fundamental problem with this issue, I always saw it this way, is that it is a conflict that is about two diametrically opposed narratives. So far as the land is concerned, and this really bears importantly on the question of refugees. To Jews, the entire area from Ras Nakura in the north to Rafah in the south, from River Jordan in the east to Mediterranean in the west, that's land of Israel. Land of Israel. That's what it is called in the Jewish narrative. To us Palestinians, it's our ancestral homeland, all of it. From north to south, east to west. I mean, that's what we're looking at, essentially. What gets lost in the shuffle is that back in 1988, when none other than our late President Yasser Arafat stood up in Algiers and said, in the name of God, on behalf of the Arab Palestinian people, I hereby announce the establishment of State of Palestine. That, together with so-called Palestinian Peace Initiative, came to mean acceptance on the part of Palestinians as a solution to this conflict of a Palestinian state on the territory Israel occupied in 1967, which includes East Jerusalem, by the way. So on the principle, we're right. And that, by the way, happens to be 22% of what the Jews regard as land of Israel and the Jewish narrative, and for Palestinians, the Jewish people is land of Israel, Palestinian people is our ancestral land. So effectively we accepted 22% of that piece of property, real estate. And that was not really on offer in Camp David in 2000. As to refugees, again, the whole issue relates to whose land it is, when you are talking about narratives. There is no question, there should never be a question about Palestinian people who were dispossessed in 1948, in that period, have right to return. It's enshrined in international law. Negotiations should never be about basic fundamental rights that are enshrined in international law or on principles. Negotiations can and should be about arrangements and assurances. How do you really bring about, a resolution? We have this narrative, we have that narrative. I as a Palestinian should not be expected to recognize the Jewish narrative, much as I do not expect the Jewish people to recognize our narrative and just like say yours, because see, these are competing. They cannot really coexist if you really think about it. At the same time, we want a solution. So we need to talk about arrangements and assurances with respect to access, with respect to the rights enshrined international law for refugees to return. Now, in Camp David, there was a provision that, as a matter of fact, subsequent to Camp David, what is famously known as the Clinton parameters. Subsequent to the Iran, President Clinton tried to really salvage the deal, and he actually produced his own ideas, and they were called Clinton parameters. And he basically said, this is it, they will go away with me. I'm leaving office, and they'll go away with me. And they included return of some refugees back to what is now Israel, to be honest with you. In subsequent negotiations, including Albert Abbas talks, as a matter of fact, there was acceptance of the proposal to return some refugees to what is now Israel. That's really part of the deal. But it's also understood that many refugees where they are, some may be in this room, as a matter of fact, would probably end up staying where they are, whether in Latin America, United States, or future state of Palestine. But there should never be a question about their right to return. That's another matter. That's another matter. That's a question, that's a fundamental question of narrative. And all I really say, Camp David did not produce because of one fundamental problem. And that fundamental problem is still with us today. If anything, it has become bigger problem, and over time becomes bigger and bigger. And that relates to the issue about Arafat having become more popular and Barak less popular after the breakdown. The gap between that which is or was on offer by Israel and what the Palestinians were prepared to accept was too wide to bridge. Since then, that gap has grown wider, as a matter of fact. So something really needs to happen to bridge the gap. That's not bridgeable anytime soon, I don't think, to be honest with you. Realistically, it's not. So what do? I think what we really need to do is to engage and say, we, I mean Palestinians, in a dogged pursuit of our right to freedom and statehood in a country of our own by insisting on projecting its reality on the ground in spite of the occupation, to end it. If we talk about Palestinian state, make it happen. Make it happen in the form of well-functioning institutions and infrastructure of the state on the territory where it's supposed to happen. Sovereignty will come when it comes, but make reality of that which is an aspiration. And better yet, begin to do it in the way you project yourself as a state in the making, Palestinian Authority. Be responsive to your needs. Have, responsive and responsible governance that really begins to really give, especially our youth, a sense of what it means to at long last, live as free people in a country of our own. I think that's transformative. This is transformative to people, to Palestinians, and I dare say also to Israelis, because some of that transformation has to take place on both sides in order for there to be a solution. And that can happen only when there is parity in the way we do things. This conflict will never end so long as it is approached on basis of one narrative is superior to the other. Let's just really put that aside. There exists this narrative, there exists that narrative. Let's not really take issue with that. Let's really find ways to really deal with this from the point of view of people who are equal. People are people and they're the same. As our late literary luminary Mahmoud Darwish famously wrote on the 53rd anniversary of Nakba, he said something about, I'm translating now, peace will obtain. He actually wrote it to the world. It was not poetry. It was very telling. When the Israelis, go up to recognize that we will continue to hold on to the dry branches of olives, our wounded hands will continue to hold on until the Israelis come of age and recognize the national rights of the Palestinian people as provided for under international law. And he counts them. Right of return, right to self-determination, and right to a fully sovereign state on the Palestinian territory occupied by Israel in 1967. There can be no peace with occupation. There can be no peace between, literally, he said, masters and slaves. I translate it to Western audiences say masters and surrogates, because slaves kind of really is heavy. But that's what he said. There's truth to that. There's truth to that. People are people. Their needs, their insecurities have to be honored and respected. Their tragedies can never be dismissed or ignored. They really have to be understood. And their representation of what they think is important to them should never be subject to challenge by others. This is what parity is about. But then we have to live together. And much like I was really being told today, and it was very nice meeting Melinda for the first time. Of course, Bill and I go back more than 3 decades ago, but I just had the pleasure of meeting you today. We were talking about the history of the city of Lawrence itself, and it struck me how lightly we were talking about this today, with a little bit of humor in a way about the war, and something like this. It will come when that happens. It's not near, I am afraid. But paradoxically, if we really go for the long game and really get seized with that which is important, make life better for everybody, project the reality of our state on the ground, non-violently. This is not a challenge to anybody. This is first and foremost challenge to ourselves. This is about bringing out the best in us. It's transformative to us, to our youth, to Israelis, to everybody. Make this something that people would want to invest in. Who knows? When the Berlin Wall fell, when it fell in 1989, no one expected that was going to really happen. When it did happen, I was there 1 year before visiting East Berlin from West Berlin. I was with the IMF at the time. Nothing that autumn afternoon suggested to me that war was going to really come when it did. It did. And when it happened, you never really know whether it was the first drop or the last drop. The bucket overflowed. There will come that moment when there is convergence. Our job is to be on the playing field when that lucky bounce of the ball takes place. And being on the field here means going out and really not spend too much time on an initiative here and there, get really completely consumed by projecting reality of that state that we want on the ground in the way that we would want it to come out to be, one that really actually lives up to the great many aspirations and the suffering of our people for many, 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 many years. Thank you.
All I can now say is we now know who this great man is, and I suspect we have not heard the last from him in the Palestinian Authority. My guess is he will be back.